This is going to be my last recording. And yeah, guys, I know you really missed me, right? But I feel like okay, the only one I didn't do is At the Water's Edge. And Personal Helicon I did the video analysis. But At the Water's Edge seems pretty hard. So I'm pretty much screwed if I get that one. Screwed if I get that one. I was listening back to my Bogland recording. It's really insightful. You should listen to that one. That one is good. Some of them are not as high quality. And I know you've gotten used to this voice by now. It's pretty annoying, but you're stuck with it if you want to get a 7 in IB. We're doing Strange Fruit today, and this is the first time I've read the poem, and I just went through it and I just wrote a few things down. And I could pretty much deduce from reading it the first time. I'm just going to pretend that my 8 minutes starts now. That it's about a bog body. The idea that her skin is pruned and how she got beheaded as a sacrifice to Nerthus, the god of fertility, as we talk about in the poem Nerthus. The idea of the feminine, the circular, how the circular also represents a certain female organ, and V also the idea of V, in Hercules and Antaeus also represents a certain female organ. So that by now I'm like best friends with Heaney, even though he's dead, but I'm best friends with him in the sense that I know his works through and through. So my thesis is that Heaney wrote this poem in response to one of the bog bodies, and admiring the idea of the girl's fate is actually ironical. His admiration, his veneration, to emphasize the point that our view of the past, and therefore our view of violence, is wrong. And let's just go through the poem line by line. In the first poem, here's the girl's head like an exhumed gourd. And first we start off with the simile, and we start off with the head. We don't actually know that it's beheaded until later on, but already with this idea of the exhumed gourd, it's already awe-inspiring. And when I say that, I mean shocking, because the gourd, using the adjective exhumed, dehydrated, sucked out, lifeless in general, but not only lifeless, but oval face, prune skin, and prune stones for teeth. The idea that it's wrinkled and it's an old person. However, at this point, all we know about the girl is not necessarily anything out of the ordinary, except for the juxtaposition between this type of wrinkly describing the old person and simply calling her a girl. And the use of punctuation in the second line is there to attribute these parts of the fruit, the prune, to the girl's different features. And in the third line, they unswaddled the wet fern of her hair. We can deduce that they is referring to those people in the museum, the archaeologists. That's why they made an exhibition of its coil. Perhaps her hair was separated. We question why her hair and her head are being described as in two separate manners. So now we can begin to work out the fact that perhaps she was beheaded and her hair was cut off. So they took different parts of her and put her in different places. And that is simply barbaric. But the author realizes this to an extent. And when they say made an exhibition of its coil, it's almost as if it were a criticizing tone. Mainly because referring to the girl as an exhibition is taken as an insult. Putting her in a museum, putting her in a cage, even though she's dead. But let's carry on to the fifth line. The idea: let the air at her lettery beauty. That makes no sense to me. Lettery. Again, the prune, the wrinkles, so we know this person's old. Yes, thank you. But it's beautiful. This is like the idea in Death of a Naturalist. that although by looking into the past you find beauty, looking back in time, while at the same time, it's important to see through the violence. This is like the other poem, what's it called? The Tollen Man, or the Grobel Man. Basically, all of these poems talk about the idea of how he calls it beauty, but then later on in the poem, he changes his mind and basically starts saying outright how violent it is. So this would probably be my first argument. I've established the fact that that the girl is that he sees the girl with this veneration and beauty because of these unique traits. But then the unique traits open the way up to violence, which is my second argument. Her broken nose, dark as a turf clod. Basically, it's like peat. And the idea of how peat is useless, you can mention that again. Her eye holes are blank as pools in the old workings. So this is like a simile and an oxymoron at the same time. You could comment on how pools of water are always filled with life and they're always moving. I don't know. The pool could mean something else in this case. I don't know what old workings means. But her eye holes are like pools, which is meaning that makes no sense. Oh wait, because her eyes are gone. So her eyes are decomposed. So when they say blank as pools in the old workings, they mean that the pools are empty. So it's not really an oxymoron, it's just a simile. Now we have our allusion to Diodorus Siculus, which I either assume is a Shakespearean character or some Greek person. One or the other. It's either from a Shakespearean Greek tragedy or it's from a Greek mythology. Probably the Shakespearean. Tell me if I'm right, actually. Okay, it contrasts the death of Diodorus with the girl, because the fact is, from what I can deduce from this punctuation, that's colon, is that the gradual easement on the likes of this. That Diodorus confessed and was condemned to death. That's what I can make out. Murdered, forgotten, nameless, terrible. Just like Jesus Christ, okay? How they, except not forgotten. Jesus was never forgotten. You could say that he was murdered, nameless, but he has a name. That's a juxtaposition right there. Terrible. Murdered and terrible is the main point we can take from this. That there's two types of death by violence. There's a type where you admit to a crime and you're murdered as a criminal, or there's the one where you're a sacrifice and that you're actually exalted for it. And that's what happens with the girl in the last 3 lines. Beheaded, outstaring axe, and beatification, outstaring again. This idea of the axe being personified, the repetition, and also the alliteration in beheaded. Let me just go back a bit and talk about the pash of tallow, the line that's the 5th line, 6th line, because there's an assonance there. Pash, tallow. I don't know what tallow is. I assume it. I think of talcum powder, and pash like some kind of medical, some kind of chemicals. That's what I think of. Tell me if I'm right. Okay. Beheaded girl, outstaring axe, beatification. So this idea of her becoming like a saint, sainthood, canonization, beatification. That was the purpose of the sacrifice. And this is what had begun to feel like reverence, is the last line. It's beginning to feel like it. Because you have to overcome all these mental boundaries to accept a fact that is not true. So he's basically trying to ignore his consciousness telling him that violence is wrong to accept this. However, you also question whether violence is part of the human nature, which is why they're being sacrificed like this. And whether the violent thoughts continue even in the present day with the speaker's mind. Cultivating this idea of violence as a means to exalt oneself. And there we have our strange fruit analysis. Tell me if you enjoyed that, because this was the first time I read this poem, and It sounds like it would be good to talk about, although it's pretty short. Is it a sonnet? If it's 14 lines, then call it a sonnet. Actually, it has no rhyme scheme. Don't call it a sonnet. Bye bye.